Hello and welcome to Model Kit Stuff and what is part 5 of our Werk U9 build. The ever-changing world of the U9 build. When we last talked, we were setting out to have a look at making some changes to the bow. And in my mind at that time was, am I going to put railings on? What am I going to do about rigging ports? But I'm nearly there. Things have moved on a little bit. I'm sure those of you that have been watching the same build on Nigel's channel will be aware that things are changing at a pace in terms of understanding of this boat. So I've decided that I'm not going to put the handrails on, I don't think. I am going to rig the ship though, and I do want to do that as authentically as possible. There is subsequently a photo etch set has recently come out for it, and it's not very expensive, and it does have things like the handrails and bits and pieces on. But I've decided I'm not going to buy into it. However, you can download the instructions, and the instructions is a good way of getting a view of the rigging arrangements. So we will use the instructions at least. Okay, so since the last video I've taken a look at the bow, and we have taken some material off the front there. So what we've done is we've gone in and just, if you remember, there was a little sort of squared off nose at the end here, and we've just tapered that in line with the edge of the bow, and then we've just sanded that down, and basically we're rounding it off and making it look a little bit more in scale. It's also allowed us to make the ribs a little bit more pronounced. When we've got to the underside of the hull here, it was a little bit squared off and it didn't quite look right, so we've rounded that off as well. You can see how much we've gone far back because of the missing primer, and it's about 4 centimeters. Now this part here is a bit problematic. I contemplated cutting it off, separating it, thinning out the middle, squeezing it back together, but I quite like the look of it sticking out there at the bottom. It looks a little bit mean. I'm probably going to do a little bit more work on it just on here to round it off and blend it in a little bit. But I quite like it as it is, and it means I can save all that rivet. We've got some rivets to put on there, but we've got 1 or 2 rivets that are missing along the centre line of the keel anyway. And we've taken off the rivets that were on here, but we have a photograph for reference to put them back on. There's 1 or 2 that we might have damaged that we might replace as well. So that's where we are with the bow. So we'll put the rivets back on, and then we'll put our scratch built rope hook eye thing back on the front there. So I'm busy making rivets at the moment. So I'm using the smallest punch that I've got, which is my 0.6. So they're slightly larger than the other ones, but as they're only going in one area, we can argue that's what they did. And it's very simple. You just tap the punch through some plastic card, and then there's a hole in the bottom that they don't come out of. They're supposed to, but they don't. The bigger ones do, but the smaller ones tend to stay in there. So they tend to have to fish them out with the punch every now and then. But I'm doing quite a few of them, so I'm doing a few at a time, and then as we get them out, I stick them to some masking tape so we don't lose them. So you can see I've made a fair number there. I probably need another, I need 3 times that much, I would think. So we'll do plenty, because you do lose 1 or 2 in the process of sticking them on. But all we'll do is mark up where we want to put them and glue them back on. That's an easy process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to strip the cling film off now, because we've got no need for dust protection. And I'm going to take this masking off. I'm going to try and preserve it so I can put it back on as best I can, and drill the location points and put some photo etched eye bolts in. So I've started the process of adding the rivets. So we simply put a tiny amount of Tamiya thin glue on, then place the rivet, then go to the next one, and so on. I'm doing it by eye because I find if you do it by pencil you end up correcting it because it doesn't quite look right to your eye. So I'm doing it by eye, which is working okay. You can see I've done some along the bow bottom, and then some going up the leading edge there. What you can see if you look at these, just behind the front section of the bow that sticks out a little bit, you can see my rivets next to the kit rivets, and mine are a bit larger but they're not hugely out. So I'm going to carry on doing that, and I'll show you what it looks like when it's done. This is the point where I say it's really therapeutic and I'm enjoying it, but that's not true. No, it's worse than doing tank tracks. It's horrendous, but needs to be done. So I've decided to use this life colour paint for the pale grey on my U9. So this is it here. Came as part of a set, and it's described as superstructures and upperworks pre-war and early war. So I think we'll go with that. What we've got in here, and that's to do with the saga that is the bow planes. So if you've been watching Nigel's modelling bench, you know that there's been quite a discussion about the bow planes here. So we have 3 location holes, and my understanding is when as launched, the bow planes were in these upper 2 positions here, and then they decided that they would get a better performance by lowering the bow plane, which is why we have this one here. And around about 1916, U9 had a refit, which I've not been able to exactly find out, but I suspect that's when the bow plane got moved. And there are photos of her beach, which is at Morecambe, when she's about to be scrapped. And you can see that there is an upper bow plane, a lower bow plane, nothing in the middle. But the location point from where the bow plane originally was is still there. So there's no definite answer on this. But if you're going to use the bow planes upper and lower, then you're modelling U9 at the end of a life, and you need to put a gun on the top. That's different to what's supplied in the kit. The kit comes as she was launched and first commissioned. So that means the bow planes are the 2 at the top. Now you wouldn't have a lower hole if you didn't think you needed a lower bow plane. So my guess is that didn't exist when she was launched and was added, and they blanked that off and it stayed there, and that seems the logical, sensible way the bow planes have worked. So I'm going to have the bow planes in the upper 2 positions. Now I know some people think that looks a bit high, but there's lots of reference photographs of the U9 with the bow plane in that position, so I know it's correct. So I'm going to remove that. So we're going to do the line. Right then, we've just finished putting the paint down on the lower hull, and what we can see is that the Pre-shading has just helped us pick out the rivet detail. So as we put the paint down, that just thickens up, and then we very gently blend it all in so that the centre of the panels are just that little bit paler. And we've not done it one panel at a time, we've just worked with a relatively thin mix of paint, dusting it over and building it up in layers until we've got an effect that looks right. We want to look like we've got a continuous colour whilst having some modulation in the evenness of it. Right then, we've finally come to a decision on the dive planes at the bow. We're going to remove the lower location point on the basis that I believe when launched she originally had just these upper two. Okay, so I'm going to remove this and then fill it is the thought process at the moment. So I'm going to start by just removing the rivets around it. Which is a nice easy job. And then we're going to mark out the edge with my chisel so that I'm not going beyond that. I don't want to remove anything that I don't need to remove. Okay. I'll get my slightly wider chisel now. I'm just going to go in, keeping it nice and close to the surface. And I'm not putting too much force on, but this little wiggling action just helps it slowly bite into place. Okay. So we're about halfway through there. I'm just going to go back in with a smaller one. I think what we're going to do now is just reconfirm that we've got those edges nicely cut off. And because this is a hole, I think if we go in now at that angle and then that angle, we're taking the edge of the circle off. And it's moving. Now if we put too much pressure on, we'll suddenly go and do a lot of damage. So I'm being very careful at this point. We need to now go in from the top down. So I'm going to start once again by just removing the rivets. Very gently pushing that down. Now I'm going to go in at the sides. I'm being very careful here because I know that suddenly I'll get no resistance and the whole thing will just come off. There we go. So I have managed to do some damage, tried not to, but there you go. I don't want to just rip it out, There we go. So that is off. The damage we've done there is mainly to the surface, so we can simply touch that in with a bit of paint and that won't be noticeable. I've no doubt these things got a bit bashed around anyway. Big fish and things swimming into them. Okay, so I'm now just going to go back in and smooth off the area, and by doing it with the chisel I've got much more control than if I did it any other way. I'm trying to minimize the surface damage around it. So that we've just got a simple patch up and touch up job. The most difficult thing actually will be putting a little bit of strip back in and restoring that. We will we'll get a little bit of white card or something, plastic card to sort that out. Okay. I think we are done there. Right. I'm happy with that, I think. Right, let's think about filling it. Right, we need to establish how thick this little rib is. So I'm just going to take a measurement on each side just to check what that is. Make sure I've done that right. So that's come up as 0.8. And that's come up as 0.8, so we need some strip that is 0.8. So right, I've cut some strips off just using a sharp knife, and we just need to get that now cut to length initially. So hold that in place and we mark it with a knife, and we'll just cut that down. So that gives me one straight end. Just placing it on top and up of it, side on. It's ever so slightly too wide, so I'm just going to sand that down now before we cut off any more while I've got a little bit of purchase on it. So I'm going to use a little bit of emery board and just sand it with my finger. That should be nice and flat now. And put it on top. Looking at it sideways, that looks about right now, so that's good. Okay, so carefully put it back in position. Just applying a gentle bit of pressure there to mark it, nothing more. That worked out well, didn't it? Okay. Ever so slightly oversized. So I'm just going to go in there now and make sure we've got nothing that's going to cause me any obstructions. I think we're good. Okay, let's straighten up the edges. I'm doing that using the grid on the cutting mat. It's always important when you're using your knife to look down onto the top of the knife. Don't be tempted to try and look over at that face, because what happens is your knife then leans, and that's why you cut into a wedge shape. That is something I learned as a butcher. Make sure your steak is the right thickness all the way through. Not a butcher anymore though. That was my first job after leaving school, butchering. Okay, just going to trim that back a little bit. And just continue doing that until we've got it to fit. So it's just taking a shaving at a time off. And again, I'm using the grid to make sure I've got a nice square edge. Right, we have finished trimming that up, and that is now the right width and the right length and in the right place. So if nobody breathes for a minute, please, we'll just glue this in. Okay, looking at it, there will be a small hole to fill that's tiny, and we'll use the Vallejo putty for that, because we can put that in and wipe it away with a bit of damp towel, and we don't have to do any sanding back or anything, so we've minimised the amount of damage to the hull. And then we just touch that up, and then when we come to do some weathering, we can make sure that we put anything over there to blend it in. So I'm happy with that. We'll let that dry, and we can then crack on with the other side. Okay, while the modification we've just made to the hull is curing, and want that glue to be dry for a little while before we go in and attempt any sanding, we need to revisit the deck at the bow here. So if you cast your mind back to an earlier video, we noticed there was a 1mm gap, and what we did was we shimmed that at this point here. We put some plastic card in, and that allowed us to close the gap without it being noticeable and without us modifying the deck. And the reason we did that was because it was easier. Now at the time I got a comment that was all very logical, but you were causing a misalignment further down, and I couldn't see what he was talking about because there's nothing to line up against. What I now understand he meant was this part here where there's a gap. So there's a gap here, there's a part that goes in, and basically what happens if I just pop this into place. Is this clips over the side there, and it should marry up and align with these, and it doesn't, because we've pushed the deck back. So we have to now move the deck forward. So there is a gap. That's because this has been manufactured slightly misaligned. So we need to move the gap from where it was at the front, move it backwards, recreate the gap, and then fill it again. Yeah. So my thought process looking at the deck is as follows. There are a number of places where the deck naturally has a recess, and we could cut it at any of those points, but then we're changing the thickness of it and it's not going to look right compared to all the others. So Nigel at Nigel's modelling bench, he tackled it by making a cut here, because it's the narrowest point either side of the command tower, and that made sense. So he could have his deck fully aligned at the bow and at the stern, and then easily fill that because it's smooth, which makes a lot of sense, and not noticeable. I've contemplated whether we can make a cut here at this point, because the deck is still flat, move it forward and extend that bit there, which means that we've not changed any depth of any of the other decks. But before I do that, I just want to check the fit of the conning tower. To recall in Nigel's video that he said that the conning tower was a little bit slack fitting, and that once he'd extended it, it fitted a lot better. So I just want to see if that's the case with mine. Yeah, so I'm putting it on and there is some wriggle room. So we're going to do the same. Thank you, Nigel. You're a scholar and a gentleman for your suggestion there. So that also means I have the additional task of taking that shim back out. So the shim that we put in here needs to be removed. So I'm going to try and do that first, and we'll see where we get to. So it seemed to make sense to me to try and locate the back of that shim and see if we can prise it out. How easy that's going to be, I don't know. So I'm just going in with my chisel here, nice and gently, just pushing down a little bit and getting a bit deeper every time. Right, well that's white, so I know I've not gone back to the original model. that looks like we're back at the original model there. Okay, so I'm going to carefully, apologise if I get my hand in the way, but I need to make sure I get this right. I'm trying to do it on camera for you because I'm sure you're enjoying me having to undo my modification. Probably more than I am. I think that's taken me back to the original kit plastic there. So the thing about the plastic card is it's softer than the original kit, so that's giving me something to just butt against. So I'm getting a bit of resistance when I get to the kit plastic. Right then, let's fit the deck. Let's see if that's resolved the issue. Happy days. So that's all good. Problem that now causes is at the stern. So the stern of the deck now will not fit in to the two location points underneath there, which is why we're having to cut it and extend it. So going to saw across this middle section here. Now we have, I think we're going to do it just behind the location points for that internal piece. So let's do that. Let's get this bad boy out of the way. So looking underneath, we've got a ridge here. That would help me keep that straight. I don't want to do anything forward of that internal detail. I want to do it in this rear section, but that is just underneath here, so that's not going to help me too much. What I need to do is give it a bit of a shim. So I'm going to get some rod. We're just going to so cut another one of those. Okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use those to help keep a nice straight line when I do my cut. So I need to get my saw out, just bear with me. So I'm going to use the coarser side of me, and I'm going to start by just putting a location nick in at each side. Just to make sure that we keep it nice and straight. These will help as guides once we're underneath, but the edge here is slightly higher. You have to be careful because these saws can break. Don't think we need those now. I'm going to use my bigger saw, I think. There. Yeah. Okay. We've now butchered that. No going back now. Okay. Let's get this back inside the U-boat and see what that's doing for us now. So we'll fit this stern deck first. Which is, I've not modified this, but it is quite tight. So that goes in nicely, and then we're going to put this bow section in. Struggling to get this in the camera for you. There we go. Fortunately, the deck pops in quite nice and tight. I think I've still got a little bit of clean up on my front bow edge there. I think it's not 100% where it needs to be. It needs to be about there. You can see it's just kicking up a little bit, so we'll just sand that down a bit. But that does then give us this gap, which, just out of interest, well, I'll pull that forward now, but yeah, makes that fit nicely. So what I'm going to do, I think, is make sure that bow fits. Then we're going to glue a couple of strips underneath, and then we can put some plastic card in and fill that. So I'm going to go and adjust the bow, and then I'll come back to you and you can see how we tackle this. Okay, so we just gave the front of the deck a light sand, and that just solved the slight overlap issue. It was minor, just enough to snag it really. And we have subsequently popped the now forward deck in, because I've got two decks effectively, and we've put these pieces in here on both sides to make sure everything fits nicely. and that clicks into place lovely, and everything looks great. And yeah, actually looks really nice. So that gets us back to my gap. So my solution for my gap, just going to get rid of all this dust, is to put a little tab underneath as a locating point. Now if I click this out, I can show you. It is terribly tight here at the back. Every time I come to take it out, I think I'm about to break the deck. Right, next time it goes in, it's staying in. Probably, possibly, maybe. There she goes, she's out. So, what I've got is, the deck is sitting on these location shoulders on each side, and pretty much where we've cut is where the shoulder finishes. So if I lift this out, you can see what I mean. So my cut is pretty much, there's my tweezers, pretty much, I need one of Ron's pointing devices, don't I? Pretty much here. So that's doing two things. Firstly, this is quite a sizable hole here, and you can see in it. If I look down there, I can see the internals are all grey. So I'm going to see this white strip quite easily as well. So we might just paint this area in here black or something. Anyway, if I pop this in without popping the back end in, like so, just make sure I've got it aligned at the back. No, I'm not going to push the back in. Not quite. There we go. There we go. So, what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue one of these into place underneath here, and then we're going to shim this with some plastic card. So before I do that, I want to make sure I've got a nice flat edge for this to bond to. So I'm just going to give it a gentle sand, make sure I get my not coarse side. Okay. And I'm just going to deburr that now. So simply drag my knife at an angle that way. We will have to do some sanding anyway, so I'm not too worried about the inside. In fact, I'm going to leave the inside. I'm not going to shim that. I'm only going to shim each side of the control tower. So put that back in, and what we'll do is glue that in there like that. So I just want to check the fit. Yeah. So because we cut it to the length that fitted in between these two, I know I've got a nice tight fit between those two as well, so that's an added bonus. So we'll pop her out, move her out of the way. Sure that we've got a decent amount sticking out, and we'll pop some glue in. So we've got a little lip there for that to sit on. and then what we can do is we can run a shim that runs from there, say, all the way up to the edge. So I think my gap was 1 millimetre, wasn't it? So I need to get some material. Okay, so we're ready to add these shims. We've got to bear in mind that the deck isn't glued in, so it's not clamped together. So I'm not too worried about an exact fit on length yet, as long as it's not undersized. So first thing I want to do is just check the thickness. So it's slightly oversized, which is what we want, because we want to do as little filling as possible, ideally none. So we need to just sand that down in the first instance. So I've sanded that down now so it fits in. So we now need to get the length right. So we want it to sit here on the little lip on that's supplied by the kit, and then we want to sit it onto the white plastic card that we've glued into this side of the deck. So I'm just going to mark that off. And we can put that down. Let's see how that now fits in. So that's fitting into the deck okay. It's catching a little bit on this little lip here, so I'm just going to take that down. It's only for guiding the conning tower into place, so it's not needed. Okay, that's a nice fit. So we'll leave that there for now. I'm just wondering if the other half of this fits in there. Yeah, same problem as before. Just take that away. I'm not sure if this is long enough. Yeah. Right, a little bit more sanding of this bit and we'll test it. Okay, so they're both fitted in now. I'll just show you. And the fit there is really tight, so hopefully we'll be able to glue that in, trim it down and paint over it without any need to fill. If we do need to fill, it's not a problem, but if we can avoid it, we will. So what I'm going to do now is just squeeze the decks together so that these two shims move inwards, so that when we clamp this together, when we're gluing it in, we know the shims aren't going to cause an issue. So that should be okay. And go back in the spares. And I'm going to glue in those edges first. And we're going to glue in there, which should bond this deck to that connecting shim. Right, that hopefully will solve that. Let's go back and have a look at our hull modification. So we're back at the hull modification now, and we want to just trim that down. So let's just see. Yeah, my smallest one will be big enough. So I start by sanding it down very carefully, and we'll use relatively coarse because we want to take that down quickly. So making sure we're not making contact with anything else. Okay, so I'm just going to put a little bit of masking tape down to protect the area. Just make sure we don't do any more damage than we need to, really. Okay. So we've taken that down by about just under half, I think. And what we want to do now is just trim that away. Want to be careful not to lift it. I'm going to lift it there, I think, so I think we're going to have to gently sand it. Nearly there. So I'm going to my smoothest grit on this emery board. We're starting to take away the masking tape on the rib here, so I know we're nearly there. There we go, we are flush. So I'm just going to carefully trim away the edges and just get them nicely aligned. So that's the sanding process has just made it splay out a little bit. There we go, that's one side done. It's not quite right yet on that one side there. That appears to be good, so we just need a little bit of filler now. So I don't want to do any sanding more than I have to. So I find this Vallejo plastic putty is really good for this type of job. Very, very tiny seams, and where you don't want to be sanding back, this is a great product. But its uses are quite limited compared to other putties. Still handy to have in your arsenal. That seems to have dried up. Let me go and sort that out. Okay, I think we've sorted that now. There we go. Got a bit on both sides. And just going to get a little bit of paper and just wipe it in. And then what you can do with the flat side of your blade is you can just tidy that up. Let's get this masking tape off. Okay. Make sure we've not got anything blocking the gaps between those rivets, and everything's nice and tidy. There we go. Once we get a little drop of paint on that, no one would ever know. I will do the other side exactly the same. Right, let's have a look at this deck now. So that's had a few minutes to dry. So we're going to lift the deck out, and then I just want to strengthen that up a little bit. Right, so we've got the deck out. It's glued together, but obviously that joint's quite weak. So I want to just strengthen it a little bit before we put it back in the deck. Because obviously once it's glued into place it'll be a lot stronger, but because we've got a little bit of handling left to do with it, I just want to make sure that joint doesn't come apart. So we've got this strip that we used as a guide for the saw earlier, and what we can do now is just glue that into place. And we used a thin glue because it would glue more quickly, and now we're just going to use some thicker glue and make sure that we've got plenty of adhesive in all those gaps. There we go. And then if we use a little bit more of this rod, just mark that up. Didn't quite get that right, did I? Oops. There we go. I'll put some glue on this side. This is the weaker side actually, because it's the side that we didn't glue the little tab to in the first place. There we go. And then I'm just going to glue a little plate on top. So I'm flooding that with glue. There we go, that should be okay. And I'm just going to put some extra glue now, just on the inside of the little shims we've put in, which will just help a little bit of strength. So we'll leave all that to dry before we look at sanding those shims down on the other side. Okay. Right then, I think we're going to call this video done. So we have got the shims in place and they're just dried off now. We need to trim them back, so we'll do that in the next video. We have done the modification needed to remove that lower location lug, so that the dive planes can look correct as launched, as I understand it. And we have put first coats of paint down since our last video. In the next video we'll be looking at some of the rigging points, and also fitting the exhaust into the deck, and fitting the deck in place will be in our next job, along with the screws underneath and some of the other fittings. So it should start coming together a bit quicker now we've got the main alterations done. One thing that I was going to do that I'm now not is I was going to quite heavily weather the little trough that sits under there, and the exhaust system as well, but I'm now not going to do that because I've recently found out that there was a cover that went over that when she dived. That's not supplied in the kit, or, you know, I'm not sure, you know, where that is, or, you know, is that panels that they took off when they came up to the surface? Not quite sure how that worked or where they were stowed, but they're not included, so you can't do a dive version. But it does mean that there isn't water getting into there particularly, so you'll only have any erosion caused by heat and air, and maybe rain and the sea splashing around rather than being submerged. So that's going to change how I weather that little bit. Otherwise, I think we've got a plan that's coming together in the main. Okay, thanks for looking in, stay safe everyone, and I hope to see you all on the next video. Thanks for watching.